We sleep safe at night because we assume someone is watching the door. We trust our intelligence agencies like the CIA to keep the dark secrets that keep us safe. But what happens when the guard decides to open the door for the highest bidder? What happens when the people sworn to protect us decide that those secrets have a price tag? We are tracking 10 CIA agents who took an oath to protect, but chose to destroy. These are the stories of the ultimate betrayal, where greed and ego cost lives. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Murder Eyes. If you are listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said this true crime channel would never even reach 500 subscribers. But I believe these real cases, the victims, and the unanswered questions deserve to be heard. Subscribe and help me show her that these stories matter and that the truth should never be ignored. Case number 1 is that of Aldrich Ames. When we think of a master spy, we usually picture someone smooth, sophisticated, and perhaps a little dangerous. We certainly don't picture a man like Aldrich Ames. He was a mid-level bureaucrat at the CIA, a man who struggled with alcohol and seemed to be constantly fighting a losing battle with his own credit card bills. But appearances are often the most dangerous disguise of all. While his colleagues saw a mediocre employee, the Soviet Union saw a gold mine. Ames wasn't just failing at his job, he was actively dismantling the Central Intelligence Agency from the inside out. The betrayal began in 1985. Driven by a desperate need for money and a resentment toward his superiors, Ames simply walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. and offered his services. It was a transaction, cold and simple. He didn't do it for ideology, he did it for cash. Over the next several years, Ames handed over the names of almost every Soviet intelligence officer who was secretly working for the United States. Think about the weight of that for a second. These were not just files or code names. These were human beings who had put their trust in the American government to keep them safe. Because of Ames, that trust was shattered in the most violent way possible. At least 10 of these agents were executed. They were taken to basements, shot in the back of the head, and erased from history, all because Ames wanted a better lifestyle. But as is so often the case with greed, it became his undoing. You simply cannot hide a fortune when you work on a government salary. Ames began to live far beyond his means. He bought a luxury Jaguar, paid cash for a $500,000 house, and spent thousands on premium dental work. It was a display of wealth that screamed for attention. His colleagues noticed, the CIA noticed, and eventually the FBI began to watch. They monitored his phone calls, they dug through his trash, and they tracked his movements. The evidence mounted until they found a sticky note in his garbage that confirmed a meeting with his Russian handler. The game was up. In February 1994, Ames was arrested. He had compromised more CIA assets than any other officer in history up to that point. The scale of his treason was absolute. He had traded the lives of brave men for a luxury car and a bigger house. In the end, the justice system showed him no mercy. Aldrich Ames pleaded guilty to espionage and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He sits there today, a man who sold his country and his soul, leaving a legacy stained with the blood of those he betrayed. Case number 2 is that of Harold James Nicholson. There is a sacred bond between a teacher and a student. In the world of intelligence, that bond is the difference between life and death. When young men and women sign up for the CIA, they put their lives in the hands of their instructors, trusting that the people training them have their best interests at heart. Harold James Nicholson was one of those instructors. He was a high-ranking officer, a former station chief in Romania, and a man who had reached the upper echelons of the agency. He wasn't just an employee, he was a mentor. He taught tradecraft at the Farm, the CIA's legendary training facility. He looked these young recruits in the eye, taught them how to survive in the shadows and how to serve their country. And then, he sold them out. The irony here is sickening. At the exact same time Nicholson was teaching new spies how to avoid detection and protect state secrets, he was secretly photographing their faces and personnel files to sell to the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service. He wasn't just betraying an abstract government, he was betraying the specific young people sitting in his classroom. He was handing the enemy a yearbook of the next generation of American spies. His motivation, as it so often is, was painfully ordinary. It wasn't about a grand political statement or a hatred for his country. It was about lifestyle. Following a messy divorce and custody battle, Nicholson felt the pressure of financial strain. He wanted to maintain a certain standard of living for his family, and he decided that the safety of his students was a fair price to pay for that comfort. Over a period of 2 years, he received roughly $300,000 from the Russians. He met them in far-flung locations like Kuala Lumpur and New Delhi, hacking into CIA computer systems to gather the goods before his trips. But the agency had learned its lesson from the Aldrich Ames disaster. They were watching. Nicholson raised red flags not because of a luxury car, but because of a machine. During routine polygraph tests, lie detector exams that are standard for officers, his results showed deception. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to start the hunt. The FBI began a heavy surveillance operation. They watched him, they followed him, and eventually they caught him at Dulles International Airport in 1996. His pockets stuffed with exposed film containing top-secret documents. He was sentenced to nearly 24 years in prison. In most stories, this is where it ends. The traitor is locked away and the world moves on. But Harold James Nicholson wasn't done. Think about the depth of selfishness required to destroy your own life, and then decide to destroy your child's life too. While sitting in a federal prison in Oregon, Nicholson began to groom his youngest son, Nathaniel. He manipulated the boy's loyalty, turning him into a courier. During prison visits, he would pass messages to his son, who would then travel to brave meetings with Russian agents in Mexico and Peru to collect a pension for his father's past crimes. It was a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. Nicholson had already failed his country, and now he was failing as a father in the worst possible way. He used his son as a human shield for his greed. The scheme eventually collapsed. Nathaniel was arrested, and the father, who should have protected him, could only watch from behind bars as his son was handcuffed. In 2011, Harold Nicholson pleaded guilty to new charges, adding 8 more years to his sentence. He didn't just sell secrets, he sold his own bloodline. Case number 4 is that of Alexander Yuk Ching Ma. We are taught that family comes first. In many cultures, the bond of blood is the strongest loyalty there is. But what happens when that loyalty is weaponized? What happens when a family reunion isn't about sharing meals or memories, but about sharing state secrets? Alexander Yuk Ching Ma didn't just decide to betray his country on his own. He turned treason into a family business. Ma was a naturalized American citizen born in Hong Kong. He had achieved the American dream, securing a prestigious position as an officer in the Central Intelligence Agency. He served through the 1980s, learned the trade, and held the keys to the kingdom. But he left the agency in 1989, and resentment began to fester. In 2001, that resentment turned into action. The crime scene wasn't a dark alley, it was a hotel room in Hong Kong. Ma met with 5 officials from China's Ministry of State Security. But he didn't go alone. He brought his older relative, another former CIA officer. Imagine that dynamic for a moment. 2 family members, men who had both sworn oaths to the United States, sitting together in a room, selling out the very country that had given them their careers. Over the course of 3 days, they provided the Chinese intelligence officers with a treasure trove of information. They gave up details about CIA international operations, the cover identities of officers, and the methods used to communicate securely. At the end of the meeting, the Chinese officials handed them $50,000 in cold, hard cash. We know this happened because there was a witness, but the witness wasn't a person. It was a video camera. The Chinese intelligence officers had secretly recorded the meeting. In the grainy footage, you can see Alexander Ma counting the cash. It is a chilling image. A former U.S. spy sitting in a foreign hotel, thumbing through a stack of bills that represented the lives of his former colleagues. But the betrayal didn't stop there. Ma wanted to be useful again. He returned to the United States and applied for a job with the FBI as a linguist. Think about the audacity of that. A man who had already sold out the CIA was now asking the FBI for a job. Amazingly, he was hired. For years, he worked inside the FBI's Honolulu field office, translating documents. He was a mole inside the second most important agency in the country. He used his access to copy documents and take photos of sensitive files, planning to send them back to his handlers. However, the FBI eventually caught wind of the leak. They set a trap. An undercover agent, posing as a Chinese intelligence officer, approached Ma. The agent showed Ma the video, the recording from that hotel room in 2001, showing him counting the money. Most people would deny it. Ma didn't. He believed he was speaking to a fellow spy. He confirmed his actions. He told the undercover agent that he wanted the motherland to succeed. He had walked right into the trap. In August 2020, Alexander Ma was arrested. The operation revealed that he had been living a double life for nearly 2 decades. In 2024, at the age of 71, he pleaded guilty to conspiracy to gather and deliver national defense information to a foreign government. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. It was a light sentence due to his age and health, but the stain on his name is permanent. He proved that sometimes the people you should fear the most aren't strangers. They are the ones sitting across from you at the dinner table. Case number 6 is that of Jeffrey Alexander Sterling. The line between a hero and a traitor is often razor thin. It usually depends on who is telling the story. Is a man a patriot if he exposes the dangerous mistakes of his government? Or is he a criminal if he breaks his oath to do it? Jeffrey Alexander Sterling forces us to ask exactly where that line is drawn. His story isn't about greed or money. It is about anger, retribution, and a secret that was never meant to leave the vaults of the CIA. Sterling was a lawyer turned CIA case officer. He joined the agency in 1993, a time when the CIA was struggling with diversity. Sterling, who is African American, felt this struggle personally. He believed he was being held back, treated unfairly, and denied opportunities because of his race. He even filed a racial discrimination lawsuit against the agency. The relationship between the man and his employer was toxic. He was angry. And an angry spy is a dangerous thing. The centerpiece of this case is a classified mission known as Operation Merlin. It was a daring, high-stakes plan designed to delay Iran's nuclear weapons program. The CIA intended to feed Iran flawed blueprints for a nuclear component. The idea was to send them down a scientific dead end, wasting their time and resources for years. But according to the leaks that later surfaced, the operation was a disaster. The blueprints were too obviously flawed, potentially alerting the Iranians that they were being played. After Sterling was fired from the CIA, he didn't just walk away, he went to the press. He became the primary source for a book written by New York Times reporter James Risen. In that book, the details of Operation Merlin were laid bare for the world to see. Think about the implications of that. Sterling didn't just expose a mistake, he exposed an active operation. He revealed the methods the US was using to sabotage a nuclear power. The prosecution argued that this didn't just embarrass the CIA, it potentially helped the Iranians identify the flaws in the blueprints and fix them. The investigation was a slow burn. It took years for the FBI to build their case. They couldn't force the journalist to reveal his source, so they had to work backward. They looked at phone records and email metadata. They found that Sterling had been in constant contact with the reporter at the exact times the book was being written. The circumstantial evidence tightened around him like a noose. Sterling maintained his innocence. He argued that he had gone through proper channels first to report his concerns to Congress and that he was being targeted because he was a troublemaker who sued the agency. The jury didn't buy it. In 2015, Jeffrey Sterling was convicted of espionage. He was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. It was a tragedy of intentions. He wanted to shine a light on what he saw as incompetence, but in doing so, he burned down the house. His case stands as a grim warning. In the world of intelligence, your grievance does not give you the right to declassify the truth. Case number 7 is that of Richard Helms. In the world of espionage, there is a hierarchy. At the bottom are the foot soldiers, the informants, and the analysts. At the top, there is the director. This is the man who sits in the Oval Office, the man who whispers in the president's ear. Richard Helms was that man. He was the gentleman spy, a smooth, polished professional who ran the Central Intelligence Agency during some of its most turbulent years. He wasn't a traitor in the traditional sense. He didn't sell secrets to the Soviets for a briefcase of cash. His crime was far more philosophical, and because of that, far more disturbing. Richard Helms believed that the CIA was a priesthood and that its secrets were holy, so holy that not even the United States Congress had the right to know them. The moment of betrayal happened in a quiet room in 1973 under the glare of fluorescent lights, not in a dark alley. Helms was testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The senators asked him a direct, unambiguous question. Did the CIA have any money passed to the opponents of Salvador Allende? They were asking if the U.S. government had interfered in the democratic elections of Chile to overthrow a socialist leader. Helms knew the answer. He knew because he had authorized the operations. He knew the CIA had funneled millions of dollars into Chile to destabilize the government. But he looked at the senators and said, "No, sir." He lied under oath. To Helms, this wasn't perjury. It was professionalism. He operated under the belief that a spy's first loyalty is to the secret, not the law. He viewed the elected representatives of the American people not as his bosses, but as security risks. He made a unilateral decision that the American public did not deserve to know what their government was doing in their name. But in a democracy, the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. As the investigations into the CIA's illegal activities, including domestic spying on American citizens under Operation Chaos, grew more intense, Helms's perjury was exposed. He was forced to face the legal music. In 1977, the former director of Central Intelligence stood before a judge. He pleaded no contest to 2 misdemeanor charges of failing to testify fully to Congress. It was a slap on the wrist. He was given a suspended 2-year sentence and a $2,000 fine. But the reaction to the sentencing is the true twist of the knife. When Helms walked out of the courtroom, he wasn't shunned. He was celebrated. At a luncheon shortly after, 400 retired intelligence officers gave him a standing ovation. They collected money to pay his fine. They saw him as a martyr who had fallen on his sword to protect the agency. Richard Helms wore his conviction like a badge of honor. He went to his grave believing he had done the right thing. But history tells a different story. It tells the story of a man who believed that the intelligence community was above the Constitution, a state within a state, answerable to no one. He proved that the most dangerous secret agent isn't the one who sells you out for money, but the one who believes he is saving you by lying to your face. Case number 8 is that of William Campiles. We often imagine that to steal the biggest secrets, you need to be a high-ranking official with top-level clearance and a decades-long career. But sometimes, the system isn't broken by a mastermind. It is broken by a nobody who simply sees an opportunity and takes it. William Campiles was not a super spy. He was a disgruntled low-level clerk working in the CIA's chaotic mailroom-style watch center. He was a man who felt he was destined for greatness, yet he was stuck filing papers. And that resentment is a dangerous fuel. In 1977, Campiles did something so simple it is almost insulting to the concept of security. He was working his boring shift when he saw a technical manual sitting on a shelf. It wasn't just any book. It was the operating manual for the KH-11 keyhole satellite. To understand the gravity of this, you have to understand what the KH-11 was. It was the eye in the sky, the most advanced spy satellite America had ever built. It could read a license plate from space. It was the crown jewel of American surveillance, worth billions of dollars in research and technology. And William Campiles, a 23-year-old clerk, simply picked it up, shoved it under his coat, and walked out the front door. He didn't steal it for ideology. He stole it because he wanted to be a player. A few months later, Campiles flew to Athens, Greece. He walked into the Soviet embassy and handed over the manual. In exchange for the blueprint to America's most valuable intelligence asset, the Soviets paid him $3,000. Think about the math on that for a second. Billions of dollars in technology, the safety of the Western world, sold for the price of a used car. It is pathetic. The Soviets must have been laughing as he walked out the door. They now knew exactly how the satellite worked, which meant they knew exactly how to hide their missiles and tanks from its camera. America's eye in the sky had been blinded for pocket change. But the story gets even stranger. Campbell's wasn't just greedy, he was delusional. He didn't want to defect to Russia, he wanted to be a hero for the CIA. He actually reached out to his former employers and told them that he had made contact with a Russian agent. He spun a wild tale, hoping the CIA would be so impressed by his initiative that they would hire him as a double agent, a real covert operative. He thought he could play both sides and come out a winner. He was wrong. The CIA case officers listened to his story, spotted the inconsistencies immediately, and realized something was wrong. When they questioned him, his arrogance crumbled. He admitted to selling the manual. He thought he was auditioning for a promotion. Instead, he was confessing to treason. In 1978, William Campiles went to trial. The damage he caused was incalculable, forcing the U.S. to completely rethink how it watched the world. He was sentenced to 40 years in prison. He spent decades behind bars, a man who sold the future for $3,000, proving that sometimes the greatest threat isn't the wolf at the door, but the bored kid sitting at the front desk. Case number 9 is that of John Kiriakou. We like our stories to be simple. We want clear villains and clear heroes. But the world of intelligence is rarely black and white. It is a murky shade of gray. John Kiriakou lives in that gray. To some, he is a courageous whistleblower who exposed the moral rot of the American government. To others, he is a reckless narcissist who endangered his colleagues to get his face on television. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in the messy middle. Kiriakou was a highly successful counterterrorism officer. Following the attacks of September 11, 2001, he was at the tip of the spear in the war on terror. He led the raid in Pakistan that captured Abu Zubaydah, a high-ranking al-Qaeda figure. He was a man who did the hard work in the field. But he was also a man who saw things that disturbed him. He witnessed the beginning of the CIA's enhanced interrogation program, a bureaucratic euphemism for state-sanctioned torture. In 2007, years after leaving the agency, Kiriakou did the unthinkable. He went on ABC News and told the world the truth. The CIA was waterboarding prisoners. He became the first CIA officer to publicly confirm that the U.S. government was using torture techniques. For many, this made him a hero. He had pulled back the curtain on a dark chapter of history. But the government didn't see a hero. They saw a leak. The Department of Justice began hunting for a way to silence him. They couldn't necessarily charge him for the TV interview, so they dug deeper. They looked at his emails. They looked at his interactions with freelance writers and journalists. And that is where Kiriakou slipped. In an email to a journalist, Kiriakou provided the name of a covert CIA officer, a former colleague who was still working undercover. He didn't sell the name to the Russians. He didn't hand it to al-Qaeda. He gave it to a reporter he thought was writing a book. But under the Intelligence Identities Protection Act, revealing the identity of a covert agent is a felony. It is a line you cannot cross, no matter your intentions. This gave the prosecutors the leverage they needed. They charged him. Kiriakou argued that this was selective prosecution, that they were only coming after him because he embarrassed the agency by talking about torture. He pointed out the bitter irony that the officials who ordered the torture were writing memoirs and enjoying their retirement, while he, the man who said it was wrong, was facing decades in prison. The legal battle dragged on, but the risk of a long sentence was too high. In 2012, Kiriakou accepted a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to one count of violating the Intelligence Identities Protection Act. He was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison. Think about the message that sends. In the entire history of the CIA's torture program, a program that involved waterboarding, sleep deprivation, and black sites, only one CIA officer ever went to jail. And he didn't go to jail for torturing anyone. He went to jail for talking about it. John Kiriakou sat in a cell in Loretto, Pennsylvania, while the architects of the program walked free. His case is a chilling reminder to anyone inside the system who thinks about speaking up. The truth might set you free, but it can also lock you up.